Okay, so like AI, it's
Yeah.
everywhere, right? You can't escape it. It feels like it's weaving its way into every single aspect of our lives.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is everyone seems to have a totally different take on what that means, you know? You've got people out there painting these like super rosy pictures of this AI utopia, and then others who are like straight up terrified about the potential downsides.
It's a wild west out there for sure when it comes to
Yeah.
opinions on AI. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. You, our amazing listeners, you sent us some seriously thought-provoking stuff on this. We want to unpack it all.
We're going to get into this fascinating study. It tackles this very issue head on. The hopes and fears around AI. And they don't just look at it in a vacuum. They compare how the general public views AI with the views of people who are really driving the field forward, the so-called AI influencers.
And we're talking big names here, right? These are the researchers, the tech leaders, the policymakers, the folks really shaping the trajectory of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get lost in all the details, let's set the stage a bit. What's the source material for our deep dive today?
All right, so the study we're diving into comes from researchers at the University of Illinois, Chicago, Nokia Bell Labs, and the Science Center of Excellence. Quite the team, right? And they do something really cool. They created this interactive platform called the Hall of AI Fears and Hopes. Imagine that, a virtual space to explore our collective anxieties and aspirations about AI.
The Hall of AI Fears and Hopes. I like it. Very dramatic. So how did they actually use this platform to gather insights?
They used it to survey 330 adults from all across the U.S., making sure they had a good mix of ages, genders, political leanings, the whole shebang to really represent the American public. And then they took those responses and compared them with the views of 100 AI influencers.
100 AI influencers. Now, those aren't just your average social media personalities, are they? How do they define an influencer in this context?
These influencers weren't chosen randomly. They were specifically identified by Time magazine as being the most influential voices in the field of AI. So we're talking about people whose work and public statements carry serious weight and are shaping the AI conversation at the highest levels. Think leading machine learning researchers, CEOs of major AI companies, people involved in making policies about AI, that sort of thing.
Okay, Time Magazine's top 100 AI influencers versus a representative sample of the American public. So with this setup, what was the big question these researchers were trying to answer?
The core question was actually quite simple. Are the hopes and fears of the people who are developing and promoting AI in line with the hopes and fears of everyday people who will ultimately be impacted by these technologies? Do these two groups see eye to eye, or is there a disconnect?
It's a fundamental question, isn't it? Are the people building the future of AI in tune with how the rest of us feel about that future?
Exactly.
So what was the overall vibe? Were people generally optimistic about AI, or were they more pessimistic?
One of the first things that jumped out from the study was that both groups, the public and the influencers, actually expressed more hope than fear about AI when you zoom out and look at the big picture.
More hope than fear. So even with all the doom and gloom we sometimes hear in the media, people aren't entirely freaking out about the AI takeover.
Well, the public's average hopefulness score was 0.8 on a scale that ran from -10 to 10.
Point eight. So yeah, leaning slightly towards the positive, but not exactly overwhelming optimism.
Yeah, pretty much. It suggests that while there are definitely concerns, there's also a sense that AI could do some good in the world, a belief in its potential.
Okay, so cautious optimism. But we know there are fears too, right? What were some of the specific things that people expressed anxiety about when it came to AI?
Absolutely. For the public, the biggest fear that kept popping up was this feeling of losing control over AI.
Losing control. Yeah, that gets to the heart of a lot of those dystopian science fiction stories we've seen, doesn't it? The idea of AI becoming so powerful that it slips out of our grasp and starts making its own rules.
Yeah, it's a classic fear.
So that's the public's top concern. What about the influencers? What kept them up at night?
The influencers, interestingly, were really focused on controlling AI through regulation, and they also seemed to see a much wider range of potential benefits than the general public did.
Regulation, huh? So almost like they're saying, look, we get it, there are risks, but we can manage those risks by putting the right safeguards in place.
Yeah, exactly. And the researchers who conducted the study even suggested that the strong emphasis on regulation from the influencer group might be, in part, a way of downplaying concerns about their own focus on, shall we say, the profit potential of AI.
Ah, so maybe a little bit of, don't worry, we've got this. But behind the scenes, they're still thinking about how to monetize all of this. Fascinating.
It definitely adds another layer to the whole discussion.
Okay, let's drill down into some specific areas where AI could have a big impact. Employment, for example, is always a hot-button issue when people talk about AI and automation. Were there any points of agreement or disagreement between the public and the influencers on that front?
Well, both groups definitely agreed that there was a potential for AI to lead to fewer job opportunities. So no one's denying that possibility.
Right, so everyone's on the same page that some jobs are going to be affected, but were they aligned on the reasons why they thought those jobs might disappear?
Not entirely. The public tended to be worried about companies choosing AI over human workers simply because it's cheaper.
The bottom line, right. No salaries, no benefits, no sick days, just pure efficiency.
Yeah, they feared that this kind of thinking could result in increased poverty and social unrest. It's a very practical concern for a lot of people.
It makes sense. If you're worried about putting food on the table and keeping a roof over your head, the potential societal benefits of AI might seem a little abstract. What about the influencers? How did they view the impact on employment?
They generally took a broader view, focusing on the potential for AI to cause large-scale shifts in entire economic sectors. And they also brought up the possibility of workers involved in AI development itself facing poor working conditions, specifically mentioning workers in Africa as an example.
Interesting. So while both groups see job impacts on the horizon, they're looking at it through different lenses.
Hmm.
The public is worried about the immediate personal consequences, while the influencers are thinking about the bigger economic picture and even the potential for exploitation within the AI industry itself.
Right, it's two different perspectives on the same issue.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about healthcare. Everyone's always excited about the potential for AI to revolutionize healthcare, but it also raises some ethical questions. Where did the public and the influencers land on this one?
Well, the public, they were definitely hopeful about the possibility of AI leading to things like cures for diseases and more accurate diagnoses.
The dream, right? AI is the ultimate medical miracle worker.
Yeah, but they also expressed concerns about becoming too reliant on AI in healthcare. And of course, the potential for misdiagnoses was a big worry.
Yeah, that fear that we might start handing over too much control to algorithms in such a sensitive area. There's something about healthcare that just feels so inherently human, doesn't it? What about the influencers? Did they share this vision of an AI-powered medical utopia?
They were also excited about advancements in healthcare, but unlike the public who tended to speak in more general terms, they actually gave specific examples, like AI helping to improve the diagnosis and treatment of tuberculosis. So it seems like there's a shared optimism there, but the influencers are thinking about it in a more concrete, applied way.
It's interesting how the influencers are often more specific in their examples. You can almost sense that they're really steeped in the technology and can see the possibilities unfolding in their minds.
Exactly. It's a different level of familiarity with the subject matter.
Okay, now for the flip side. Let's talk about the potential for AI to be used in harmful ways. We're talking criminal activity, surveillance, things like that. Where did these fears crop up?
Oh, this was a huge area of concern for the public. They were worried about AI being used for all sorts of bad stuff. Criminal activities, governments or corporations using AI for surveillance without our consent, all kinds of exploitation. They even mentioned things like the environmental impact of AI's energy consumption and the potential for intellectual property
Yeah,
violations.
those are some pretty real-world grounded anxieties. It's not just about abstract fears of robot overlords. It's about how AI could be used to harm individuals in society right now.
Right, it's those immediate, tangible threats that people are really focused on. And it's worth noting that these concerns are reflected in current debates and news stories, so it's not surprising that they're top of mind for people.
Were the influencers on the same page when it came to these darker possibilities?
They were also concerned about irresponsible use, but their main takeaway seemed to be that we need strong regulations and maybe even a global governing body to prevent these negative outcomes. So their solution is more about putting systems in place to manage the risks.
So they see regulation as the key. It's interesting how that theme keeps coming up with the influencer group. It's almost like they're saying, look, we acknowledge the potential for harm, but trust us, we can control it.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of that.
Okay, let's move on to something a little more upbeat. Productivity. How did each group envision AI impacting our ability to get things done?
The public generally saw AI as a potential way to boost productivity by taking over those boring, repetitive tasks that no one really enjoys, doing things like data entry, sorting through emails, all that kind of stuff.
AI is the ultimate personal assistant,
Yeah.
freeing us up from the drudgery of modern life.
Yeah, and they also thought AI could be a pretty useful tool for helping with creative projects, almost like having an AI brainstorming partner.
Interesting. So not just about automation, but about augmentation, using AI to enhance our own capabilities.
Mm.
What about the influencers? Do they share this vision of an AI-powered productivity boost?
They also saw AI as a way to increase productivity, but they focused more on how it could drive innovation across various industries. They gave some pretty specific examples, like using AI to reduce waste in the fashion industry or to assess wildfire risks, which could be really useful for insurance companies and financial institutions.
Okay, so they're thinking about it on a bigger scale across entire industries.
Yeah.
AI as an engine for progress and efficiency.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we can't talk about AI without addressing the elephant in the room, which is misinformation. Deep fakes and the ability to manipulate information are huge concerns these days.
Hmm.
What were the public's anxieties in this area?
The public was definitely worried about AI being used to spread misinformation. Deep fakes were a big one, with people mentioning things like fake videos of politicians saying things they never actually said. They even talked about the possibility of AI being used to mimic the voices of loved ones, which is a really unsettling thought.
Yeah, that's getting into some seriously creepy territory. It highlights how AI could be weaponized to erode trust and sow discord. Were the influencers as concerned about this as the public was?
They were definitely concerned about misinformation as well, but they tended to frame it in a broader context, talking about how AI could intensify global conflicts and widen the gap between democratic and authoritarian countries. So they're thinking about it more in terms of its impact on the geopolitical landscape.
It's interesting how they keep bringing it back to these big picture global implications. It's like they're constantly zooming out to see the whole chessboard, while the public is more focused on the immediate threats in their own backyard.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, finally, let's talk about privacy. With AI systems often relying on massive amounts of data, it's a natural concern for a lot of people. What were the main takeaways on privacy from each group?
Interestingly, the loss of personal privacy was actually identified as a key fear by the influencers. They were worried about things like whether people are truly consenting to having their data collected, how personal information is being tracked, and the potential for that data to be misused, especially by surveillance technologies. But what's kind of surprising is that the public, while they were concerned about losing control over AI in general, the issue of personal privacy wasn't as prominent in their initial top-level fears as reported by the study.
That is surprising. You'd think with all the data breaches and privacy scandals we hear about, it would be front and center for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely an unexpected finding.
Okay, so we've looked at the overall sentiment and some of these key themes, but the study also dug a little deeper and examined how specific subgroups within the influencers aligned or didn't align with the public. What did they find there?
This is where it gets really interesting. They found that younger influencers, those under 38, along with academics and those who weren't billionaires, tended to align most closely with the views of the general public. Also, influencers who identified as white and those working outside of Silicon Valley were more aligned with the public's views.
So it sounds like age, wealth, and location might play a significant role in shaping how people perceive AI and the risks and benefits associated with it. Younger people might be more in tune with how the general public feels. Academics, their focus is often on the societal impact of their work, and people outside Silicon Valley might have a bit more distance from the hype that sometimes surrounds AI.
Exactly. It's like they're seeing it from a different vantage point.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But who were the groups that were most out of sync with the public?
The groups that showed the biggest disconnect were older influencers, over 38 billionaires, and people working in the heart of Silicon Valley. So basically, those who hold a lot of power and influence in the AI world seem to have a different perspective than the average person on the street.
That's a pretty stark contrast. It almost suggests a bit of an ivory tower effect, where those who are deeply immersed in the technology might be losing sight of how it's perceived by those who aren't as tech savvy or who might be more worried about the potential downsides.
It's definitely something to think about. And it raises questions about how we can bridge that gap and ensure that the development of AI is truly representative of everyone's concerns.
Absolutely. And what about within underrepresented groups? Was there good alignment between influences from those groups and the public from those same communities?
This was a really fascinating and honestly kind of concerning finding. The study actually found that AI influencers who came from underrepresented groups, women and people of color, for example, actually showed less alignment with the views of the same underrepresented groups within the general public.
Really? That's so unexpected. You'd think that shared lived experiences would lead to greater alignment of views. What's going on there?
It's hard to say for sure, but it suggests that simply increasing diversity in AI leadership positions might not be enough to guarantee that the concerns of marginalized communities are being effectively represented or understood. There might be other factors at play, like how individuals navigate predominantly white and male spaces, or the pressures to conform to certain perspectives in order to succeed in those environments.
That's a really crucial point. It's not just about who's at the table, but also about the power dynamics at play and whether those voices are truly being heard and acted upon.
Right. It's about more than just representation. It's about truly creating inclusive and equitable spaces where diverse perspectives can flourish.
Okay, so we've identified some key groups that are more or less aligned. But what about the substance of those different viewpoints? What were the major themes that emerged?
Well, the groups that were most aligned, younger influencers, academics, non-billionaires, tended to have a cautiously optimistic outlook on AI. And they emphasized a few key themes. Making sure AI development is guided by human values like fairness and equity and human rights, being transparent about how AI systems make decisions so people can understand them and trust them, being willing to slow down the pace of development if it means making sure AI is safe and ethical, and preventing too much power over AI from ending up in the hands of just a few companies or individuals.
Those all sound like pretty reasonable priorities.
Yeah,
It's about making sure AI serves humanity, not the other way around.
exactly.
What about the groups that were less aligned? What were their main concerns?
The less aligned groups had some interesting perspectives too. Older influencers, for example, even though they weren't as aligned with the public overall, were really focused on the need for democratic AI development, making sure that lots of different voices are involved in shaping its future. And they were also particularly worried about AI potentially making global instability worse, which makes sense given their age and the historical context they're coming from.
So they're bringing a more geopolitical lens to the discussion. What about the billionaires? What was their take?
The billionaires, as you might expect, were very optimistic about AI's potential to make us more productive and creative, and even give us more leisure time. They saw it as a way to boost efficiency in the workplace and help people achieve greater fulfillment in their personal lives.
So their focus is on maximizing human potential, with AI as a tool to help us achieve that. But it's definitely a different perspective than the public's concerns about job displacement and economic inequality.
Yeah, there's a clear contrast there.
You also mentioned earlier that there was a difference in how these groups talked about the potential benefits of AI. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, the influencers were much more specific in the examples they gave of how AI could be used to do good in the world. They talked about things like improving healthcare, tackling climate change, optimizing resource management, all with concrete examples and a deep understanding of how the technology could be applied. But the public, when they did mention benefits, tended to be a lot vaguer.
So the influencers could really paint a vivid picture of the possibilities because they're so close to the technology, while the public might be struggling to envision how AI will actually impact their lives in a positive way.
Right, it's a difference in how they conceptualize and articulate the potential benefits, and that could be a key barrier to building public trust and support for AI.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, but for our listener, why should they care about all of this? What's the takeaway message?
I think the most important thing for listeners to take away is that there's a real gap between how some of the most powerful people in the AI world view the technology and how the general public feels about it. And this gap is especially pronounced when it comes to fundamental questions of control, who benefits, and how power is distributed.
And as you pointed out earlier, that misalignment within underrepresented groups is particularly troubling.
Yeah, it's a sign that we need to be doing a lot more to ensure that the development of AI is truly inclusive and reflects the values and concerns of all members of society, not just a select few.
So what can listeners do with this information? How can they use it to navigate this increasingly AI-driven world?
Well, first of all, just being aware of these different perspectives can help you critically evaluate the information you come across about AI. Don't just accept everything you hear at face value. Ask questions, challenge assumptions, and form your own informed opinions.
That's great advice. And you mentioned earlier that the Hall of AI Fears and Hopes platform used in this study is actually open to the public. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, if you're interested in learning more, you can check it out online at https://social-dynamics.net. Fears and Hopes. It's a great resource for exploring the various hopes and fears that people have about AI and even seeing how your own views compare with others.
Excellent. So, for our final question, we want to turn it over to you, our listener. What stood out most to you in this comparison of AI hopes and fears? What questions does it raise for you about the future of AI and its impact on your own life? Think about it, and let's continue this conversation in the comments.
AI is here to stay, but the shape it takes and the role it plays in our lives is still being written. And that's a story we all have a part in shaping.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another exploration of the fascinating world of emerging technologies.
See you then.
Bye.